Now, what I want to ask you now is, how many of you consider yourself salespeople? Okay, drop in the comments. Sales. Just type sales in the comments, right? So I can see how many of you consider yourself that you are salespeople. Okay, I want to see. Now, once you've done that, I got another question for you. How many of you actually consider yourselves storytellers? Okay, so this is a big difference between a salesperson and a storyteller. Okay, a salesperson, people run away from you. Storyteller, people run towards you. So it's a big difference. Okay, so how many of you consider yourself storytellers? Please drop it in the comment section. I want to see, right? The key thing here is that stories are very powerful, right? Storytelling is extremely amazing and extremely results driven, because facts can only take you to one level, right? But stories can take you all the way. Facts tell, stories sell. Write that down. Facts tell, stories sell. This is absolutely very, very key. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, right? Now, we put a monkey in a room with two things. Okay, say I put a monkey in a room with $3,000, right? 3,000 US dollars and 3 bananas. Okay. Now, question: how many of you? Actually, no. I'm going to ask you all of you, just to drop in the comments. What do you think the monkey will choose? Is the monkey going to choose money, or is the monkey going to choose bananas? Drop it in the chat so I can see. Okay. Those of you who say bananas, you're absolutely right. Okay? You're absolutely right. It's bananas, of course. Monkey's going to choose bananas, right? But you know how I talked to you about billionaires, and I talked to you about how billionaires are curious and they never stop asking questions, especially questions that escape other people. Okay, so here's one example. So there was this billionaire, you probably know him, and he also asked a question, right, about this monkey and bananas. But his question, this, by the way, is Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba. He asked the same question, but he asked it in a different way. He asked, why did the monkey not choose the money? That was his question. Not what did the monkey choose. The question was, why didn't the monkey choose the money, right? And his answer was this: monkeys don't know that money can buy a lot of bananas, right? So the monkey had no understanding that 3,000 US would be able to buy enough bananas, not just for that monkey's lifetime, but for 3 generations down the road, right? That's how much bananas you can buy with 3,000 US dollars. Now, story, okay, is the same thing, right? Right now, you're trying to sell a service, you're trying to sell a product, okay? And you're really, really focusing on the small game, okay? You're focusing on the hard game. You're focusing on what everyone else is playing, okay? If you want to play like billionaire, if you want to play with a different mindset, you need to think of a different type of approach to how you are communicating yourself, okay? So what do I mean by story? Why is story so much more better than a product? So let's have a look, okay? So I'm now making a bold claim here, okay? I'm going to make a bold claim, and by the end of today's session, okay, by the end of today's session, you are going to agree with me, okay? And I'm going to prove it to you, and you are going to agree with me, right? Storytelling is the fastest way to deliver results for sales, marketing, fundraising, and recruiting. Okay, it's the fastest way. Don't take my word for it. Here, the richest man in the world, soon to become the trillionaire, right? Is Jeff Bezos, and he is talking about you can have everything, right? You can have everything right, but if you don't have the right story, it's game over. Okay, so here, the richest man in the world is telling you this, right? Another multi-billionaire again, right? He talks about if you want to be successful today, you need to be a good storyteller. These are all business people, right? Here's another one, Gary Vee, talking about how most people like the monkey, right? Most people are like the monkeys. They're thinking like monkeys in that sense. They're just going for the bananas, right? They don't want to think on a higher level to say, hey, what can I do with the money that will buy much more bananas for me, right? So here's Gary Vee. Here's a multi-award-winning New York Times best-selling author, right? Seth Godin. He talks about how marketing has changed, right? It's now all about storytelling, right? And that's another ball guy here, okay? He talks about storytelling as well, okay? And again here, Seth Godin, talking about how people are now buying not just your products or services. So don't sell your products or services. Sell relationships, sell stories, sell magic, right? Sell experiences. And the icon, absolute global icon of all, Steve Jobs, and he talks about the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. Interesting that he says that, right? Interesting that he said that. Not the most powerful person in the world is the richest person in the world. Not the most powerful person in the world is the one with the most guns and bombs and nuclear armament, right? No, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. Now, makes you think, right? It really makes you think, like, what kind of stories are these people talking about? Like, what do they mean? Like, what do they mean when they talk about this, right? Well, one thing is for sure, it is definitely not this. It's definitely not the fairy tales that you were told when you were a small boy or small girl, and that your mom read to you at bedtime. No, no, no. It's nothing to do with that. Well, basically, I just want to share with you very quickly that 99.9% of the world, right, tells stories for entertainment. 0.1% of the world tells stories for business results. So I am not talking about your stories for entertainment now. I'm talking about stories for business results, and that's why we're here. Storytelling for sales, or what I call it for short, story selling. Okay, so how can you learn to be a good story seller, right? And how can you turn yourself into a storypreneur, right? Become an entrepreneur who is focused on growing the business based on story. And what is all this story about? Okay, and why is story so important? Well, first of all, the point I'm trying to say here is that we are hardwired, right, to understand stories. We are not wired to understand logic, right? Over our communication over time, we have evolved as a species, right? Over thousands of years, in recent human history, thousands of years, our storytelling brain has evolved into something that is helping us for our survival. So we are not really here to understand logic, right? Storytelling goes way deeper to a deeper part of the brain. Okay, so look, for example, stories, not 1,000 years, not 10,000 years ago. This is 44,000 years ago. Storytelling this is visual storytelling, has been recorded. And I bet you, this is just what has been found. I bet you that storytelling has existed for even longer. Okay, so our brains are very comfortable with storytelling. We are wired for stories, evolutionary. Okay, so why did Steve Jobs actually say that the storyteller is the most powerful person in the world? The reason he said that is because storytellers are able to shape your world. That's right. They're able to shape your world. Let that sink in for a minute. Imagine if you are able to shape someone's world. Imagine that, right? And that's exactly what happens, because we basically make sense of the world around us through the power of story. That's what we do, right? We make sense of the world around us through the power of story. So if you are a salesperson, right, and you think about the time that you try to convince someone, not just a customer, maybe it was your boss, maybe it was your coworker, maybe it was a family member, maybe it was your spouse, right? Doesn't matter. when you could not convince them or you could not get them to agree on your side, right? It's because you did not understand the story that they are running. So think about what Anthony Robbins had spoken about, right? About the stories that we tell ourselves. That's right, the stories that we tell ourselves, right? So I've broken this down, and this is how I understand story, right? I understand story in 3 simple ways. First of all, on the left-hand side here, if you look, we have this thing called the identity story, okay? So this is what Tony Robbins talks about, the stories that we tell ourselves. Oh, you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning when you wake up, and you say, okay, I'm fat, I'm thin, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm good looking, I'm not, okay? This is the story you tell yourself, right? This is your identity. This is who you think you are, okay? Now, then when you go out of the house, right, you put on your best clothes and you want to go for a meeting or a dinner appointment or for a date or whatever you go for, you try to create the best version of yourself. So you're trying to tell a story. You're trying to tell a story with the shoes you wear. You're trying to tell a story with the watch that you wear, with the car you drive or you don't drive, right? Whatever, the hairstyle you have, or in my case, the hairstyle you don't have, right? You're trying to always create an image for other people to see, right? And then when you leave the room, right, when you go away, people start talking behind your back, right? What are they saying about you, right? So this is the stories that other people are talking about you based on what they perceive of you, based on what you did, based on how you projected yourself, and how you acted or reacted. They tell stories about what you did, okay? So these 3 stories, right, basically between the buyer story, which is these 3 stories, okay, which they have all gaps, right? Now your story, your value proposition, you also have all your stories, right? So your story as a seller and the story as the buyer, if for example you can come into the gap, right, then the buyer story will become, your story will become part of the buyer story, okay? So basically there's a gap, there are gaps now in the buyer story, okay? If you can insert your value proposition inside the story, the buyer will embrace your product as a story. So let me give you an example. So there are basically 3 gaps. Okay, there are 3 key gaps between the identity and the image, between the image and the reputation, and between the reputation and the identity. Let me show you. Okay, so the first gap is called the reputational gap, and that is when you know what people are talking about you, and you know it's not true, right? You don't like it. You don't like it, or you don't like that you have that reputation because it's not aligned with what you are. Okay, so that's the first reputation gap. Second one is the identity gap. So this is what I told you earlier. You know, if you think you're unsuccessful when you go out and you meet with successful people, business people, for example, and you see them all all successful, then maybe you'd like to wear a Rolex watch. You like to wear a Rolex watch to give you the image that you are successful. Okay, even though you're not there yet, right? You want to create an image. Okay, so Rolex, Mercedes, these brands will benefit. These brands will benefit from somebody who has a identity gap. Okay, and then you've got the image gap. Okay, so the image gap is basically where you're trying to create a reputation. You're trying to create a reputation, but it's not working well. Okay, people can see your flaws, see your mistakes. So the image you're trying to portray is not working, right? So there's a gap, and you think, how can you fix that gap?